necessity of education. The necessity of education was increasing because industrialization was increasing. For example, in case of industrialization, you see that people are aware about how to continue in mining industry. Then people are aware about how to continue in textile industry. But suddenly there is a requirement of production of China clay materials. Then people are not aware about what kind of production processes are to be used in China clay production. So they are going to have an education on clay engineering. So once they are exposed to clay engineering and such kind of production, they are also going to put their inputs in China clay production industries. So industrialization brought ample amount of scope for people to access education, and in the process, people were learning how to get exposed to new concepts, new methods of production, and it was helping them a lot. Okay, so tell me, how many of you have heard the car brand name Ford? କେତେ ଜଣ ତମମାନଙ୍କ ଭିତରୁ Ford ଗାଡି କିମ୍ବା Ford company ଉପରେ ଶୁଣିଛ? How many of you? Just you can randomly tell that yes, you have heard about the company name Ford. Then I will tell you
Yes,
the.
ma'am.
So
Yes,
you
ma'am. We've
have
heard about
heard
it.
the name Ford, like the so-called elite kind of cars are with Ford, Audi, BMW. All these are very elite class productions of cars. So what happened after capitalism? There was a particular concept known as Fordism, and Fordism was developed from the company named Ford, and frequent and continuous larger number of production of Ford company cars led to the phenomena of Fordism. So when Fordism came into the picture, people started reading about how there can be a greater increase of production, how there can be a better capturing of the customers. So all of the phenomena were included under the so-called phenomena of Fordism. So when industrialization is understood in the context of education and its expansion and origination, you can take all these kinds of examples. Okay, and for your kind information, Fordism was mainly in the post-capitalist phase, and the unique feature of Fordism was that the surplus value or the profit orientations which were earlier made in a very exploitative manner in capitalist mode of production, that was not so in terms of Fordism. So if you get a question next time, either in your net exam or any kind of competitive exam, that what was the phenomena in the alternate of capitalism which was pro labor and which was pro workers, you can write down the name as Fordism. So students, while I am delivering you this lecture as a counselor, I would like you to make a small box, as we find in our IGNOU text also, that there is something task to take back on which you should make some study and try to get information. So I try to give you such kind of certain things which you can take back and learn and relearn. So here I would like people to write this terminology Fordism, 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 and you please check into the details of Fordism, and information regarding Fordism will really help you to understand how industrialization and education was expanding in the then period of post-capitalist phase. Then next we come to the other point, which is known as enhancement of life skills. So enhancement of life skills means what? Whenever you are going to see any kind of transition from the ancient to the medieval to the modern to the post-independent to the liberalization, privatization, globalization to the post-globalization, in all such phases, you have to always find a kind of development of your skills. If you don't develop your skills or develop your life skills, then definitely you are not going to find yourself in a position to mitigate with the challenges of the changing society. For example, everyone must have been aware of the concept of Darwin, survival of the fittest, or what we know as social Darwinism. So what we understand in the process is, until and unless you enhance your skills, you are not going to sustain in the challenges and in the crisis of the society. So you must have seen that whenever you are into any kind of problem, whenever you are into any kind of crisis, you happen to refer to read certain articles on that. You happen to read to certain practical solutions of those problems. For instance, you are feeling supposedly that you are completely locked down inside the four walls of your house, and you are feeling depressed. So any one of you can feel that I am feeling depressed. Okay, let me read about this psychological disorder or phenomena, depression. So you will try to find out on your laptops, or you are going to refer to some of the books, or you are going to read some of the articles on how does it feel when you are depressed. So you are going to confirm whatever things you are reading or you are educating yourself are exactly going to come to the similar patterns of what you are showing as a syndrome or symptom in your day-to-day life. So these are a kind of processes in which you happen to learn and relearn that how you are going to enhance your life skills to face such challenges. Once you are ready with understanding the concept of depression, then the next phase what the human brain will do is, let me then read that how I can cope up with the depression situation and what all things I should do to come out of the depression situation. So again, that also you are going to read and you are going to inculcate those skills into yourself. Suppose you are reading that you have to engage yourself in certain hobbies like singing, like dancing, or some creative creations of your painting. I am sure many of our students must be very creative also in their, understanding of the world. So you are going to do all of those things in a very beautiful manner, and you are going to bring yourself out of the feeling of depression. Okay, so this is the way in which you are enhancing your life skills. You are enhancing all the things which help you to face such challenges and come out of such challenges. Then the next part of the origination of education makes you understand towards the issue of demand for future security. So whenever you see that you are having some kind of education, that education is only degree if you are not utilizing it to secure the future crisis. So you have to make it utilized in such a manner that your future has to be also secure. Once that security comes into in, you are definitely going to build in up to your confidence level. So this is how we understand that because of these reasons, there was necessity to origination of education and then it expanded. Okay, further, it can be understood that in the earlier inception of history, all of you must be knowing about the Renaissance period. Okay, so Renaissance humanist period was such kind of a period in which rationality, objectivity, and all such questions were always asked. Education was considered to be one of the most essential backgrounds in which such kind of rational questions were asked. For example, I'll tell you that any population who are not that much exposed to the education, understanding, and the exposure, they might not ask you that level of rational and objective questions. But people, those who are already into the process of education, they are already into the process of exposure, they are going to ask you about all such kind of objective questions which a rational, educated brain should ask you. So you find that Renaissance period was as a major impulse, as a major mileage to the process of education. Then the next part is education was also getting its mileage from learning of Latin language or learning of Latin literature. In this context, it is Latin language and literature because we are referring to the world emergence of education. In the context of India, we can also understand it in terms of Indian classical literature and Indian language. Okay. So we see a very beautiful understanding of how people were again and again trying to understand languages and make themselves educated. For example, whatever today I am helping you as a counselor or whatever you are interacting with me as a student of this particular course, there is a major means through which we both the ends are interacting, and that major means is English language or sometimes our mother language, Odia. So if we are not having that kind of a connectivity of expressing, then can we be in a position to make ourselves educated? The answer is no, because without such kind of projection and such kind of an expression means none of the ends, neither you nor me, are in a position to dispatch what we want to do. Okay, so all those people who were imparting education were known as the educators or educators, and it includes writers, poets, translators, and teachers. So here in the upcoming classes you will find that there were Indian philosophical gurus like Rabindranath Tagore, like Swami Vivekanand, like Kabir. All of them were also part of this patching their education through several means, and such kind of innovative categories were always included within the educators. Okay, then we move on to understand a brief history of development of education. So in 1423, the history of education was mostly into the limelight because there was invention of printing press. Until and unless we don't print books and materials, we can never get a proper channel through which we can spread education. Okay, so in 1423, it was a very, very essential landmark in the process of development of education, because then people started taking home some kind of printed materials. For example, like whatever I am demonstrating with you today or whatever we are discussing from the PowerPoint presentation, I am sure all of you are trying to jot down some essential points out of this. And also you are having your own course materials and some referential text which is going to help you to understand the historical development of any particular course which you have taken. Without such kind of notes, without such kind of materials, and without such kind of references, it is very difficult for any student to understand the nitty-gritties of the courses. So, whenever we saw that in the historical trajectory, the printing press was working, it brought a lot of change in understanding of the entire development of education. Then in the historical process, UNESCO played a very important role where we saw that United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization 1946 encouraged mass education campaigns all across the world. Education then was much more wider than literacy, and it included skills of several kinds of learning. Okay, and in this context, while we are trying to understand education, we are also trying to see what do we mean by literacy. Okay, literacy includes just the skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic. So many of you might ask me that why is it essential to understand literacy while we are trying to understand education? Okay, so this is a kind of comparative method of Imai Durkheim which we are trying to implement here. When we are trying to understand education, we have absolutely understood it as we can understand, but to have a deeper understanding of education, we need to compare education with literacy. And when we compare it with literacy, we can understand the deep rootings of education and what are the connotations of the term literacy. Okay. First of all, very briefly, I must tell you that education is much more wider than literacy. Literacy means just to be able to read, write, and do some arithmetic calculation, algorithm, or these kinds of structural aspects. But education means something which is much more functional in nature, much more deep-rooted in nature, and in a way, the practical implication of literacy can be understood in terms of education. So the concept and practice of literacy refers to a new perspective reflecting societal change, globalizing influences on language, literature, culture, and identity growth. So what happened in the process of development of education, it was understood that you have to go in step-by-step process. So if the wider population is getting literated, the wider population is in a position to access to literacy, then definitely that population is going to be educated and is going to be in a position of disposing their functions in a wider holistic manner. Okay, so it was understood that the influences on language, literature, culture, and identity growth was always found from the literacy rate as well. The functional approach to literacy was evident in certain programs. So as I have already told you that UNESCO was functioning, UNESCO was trying to undertake several kinds of programs through which it can encourage education and make wider spread of literacy. So one such program was Experimental World Literacy Program, in which UNESCO took a leading role and many thousands and thousands of numbers of members of society across the entire world were part through such kind of EWLP program. Okay. Then literacy concepts can be widely understood by referring to Paulo Freire 1975 to several elements such as, so to get a more deeper understanding of literacy concepts, Paulo Freire has tried to give us three major aspects of literacy in terms of conception. The first one is critical literacy. So what do you mean by critical literacy? The term is used to refer to the capacity of an individual to participate as an active citizen given to critique national and international practices, claiming rights and challenging power structures. So here, I would like all of you to understand this concept that whenever a person or a group of people are able to be literate, they also happen to develop a kind of cognitive process in which they are able to ask critically some questions and analyze critically whatever they have been taught. Okay, so critiquing the national and international practices, claiming rights and challenging power structures are always essential component of critical literacy. So that means, suppose I will give you any understanding of a piece or any kind of homework, you are going to think and rethink and analyze on that so that you can ask questions and critically try to work on those tasks, thinking that what is the national implications of this, what is the international implication of this, and how the rights and challenges of the power structure can be questioned through all these issues. So that kind of an approach is known as critical literacy. Next, we come to the concept of autonomous literacy. So you must be hearing about all these autonomous literacy concepts from the year 1980 onwards, where UNESCO refers to a skill acquired with no reference to value and context. So, to make you people understand about autonomous literacy, I would like to refer to you to these educational institutions. Like you must have heard about some autonomous colleges or some autonomous bodies. So, what do you mean by autonomous colleges or autonomous bodies? That means whenever they are framing their rules and regulations, it is solely and all in all concerned to their own way of functioning and their own way of disposal. They are not answerable to any such kind of relative co-concepts or relative co-institutions. So when we understand autonomous literacy, it refers to the literacy of skill acquirements with no reference to any value or context. That means, if I would say the literacy understanding of India and the literacy understanding of America and the literacy understanding of South Africa, all of them are going to be different, then we are not going to understand the literacy of all these three continents in the reference to the relativity. Rather, we are only going to understand the literacy of India in the context of Indian society. We are going to understand literacy of America in the context of American society, and we are going to understand the literacy of South Africa in the context of South African society. So this is the process in which we understand autonomous literacy. We are not relating to any kind of relativity in the entire process. Hope you people are clear about what it is meaning to. And the last concept which we are trying to understand in order to understand literacy concept is ideological literacy, which refers to mediation of literacy by social and political ideologies. So what do we mean by social and political ideologies? For example, when we are saying about Gandhian ideology, that means all of the whole population who are trying to cherish and trying to practice Gandhian ideology are into the category of ideological literacy. Suppose I give you the example of socialist thinker Jayaprakash Narayan or maybe the Loya movement. All of those socialist people who are following the ideology of Jayaprakash Narayan and Loya are definitely going to be a part of the ideological literacy because they are following that particular domain. You can give the example of the right-wing ideological literacy, all of those who are belonging to the right wing. You can also take the example of the left wing literacy ideology, all of those who are belonging to the left ideological campaign. So this is how we understand the ideological literacy. So ideological literacy is mostly in terms of the ideas and ideologies which are going to be practiced. Okay, so with this we are trying to understand that how the literacy concepts are being done. So after discussing with you this, I would like to take a small break, and if any of you is having some interactions or questions on what we have discussed, I would like to hear from you. Yes, you can unmute your speakers and we can have a small discussion, and then I move on to the next part. Yes, can you people hear me? Am I audible to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So we will have a brief discussion and then I will go ahead. Yes, tell me. Is everything understandable to all of you? Samasta buji paucha?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there something which you need me to discuss or should we go ahead? So we have just 10 of the participants who are here. So I think then we move.
Ma'am.
Yes, Sangram Kesari Sahu. Yes, tell me Sangram.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Good afternoon, ma'am. Uh, your teaching is excellent, but I want to know that in your textbooks there is some other like uh, built-in value in education, nature and scope education. Like this, some concepts are there, but what is you are teaching us is not related to our textbook.
Sangram, since this is a teaching process, whatever is there
Okay.
in your book, that only I am dealing and that only I am letting you know. If you go as per your textbooks, you will find almost all the things that I am discussing here. And one thing I will say that teaching pattern varies from counselors to counselor. So if you want to see my lectures in terms of headings of your text, that will be difficult for you because I am not going to just, dictate or say verbally whatever is written in your textbook. Then you are having the textbook, you can definitely read that and you can understand in your home also. So what I am trying to make you understand is the background of that and whatever things are related to that. Because we are counselors, we are not in a position to completely, make you understand each and everything which is there in your textbook. Definitely, we will make you a background understanding, and from that you will try to understand your thing. Because see, whatever issues are there by the end of the lecture, if you can relate, then it is fine. But if you cannot relate, then I will suggest you that you just refer to the textbook and accordingly only you can go.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yes, your teaching is very good and excellent. I am understanding.
See, Sangram, I will tell you one thing. When teachers are here or counselors are here, thank you for the compliment. But see, I'll tell you something. IGNOU textbooks are made so efficiently and so well mannered that without even a counselor you can read that. Okay. So my purpose is not to only complete what is there in your textbooks. My purpose is to give you something extra through which you can understand the background of the entire issue. So that background I am trying to prepare. After that, whatever is there with you in the textbook, that will be just a cakewalk for you to understand. Okay?
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Can I have any more questions? Yes? Anyone else who wants to discuss? So we will move ahead.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we go ahead now.
Yes,
You
ma'am.
can, you have something to ask? So we move ahead, okay? So you can mute your microphones. Then we come to the aspect of education and characteristics, okay? So when we are discussing about education and its characteristics, you can find that there are several issues which are present while understanding the characteristics of education, and in a way that is also trying to make us understand the nature and scope of education. What Sangram was trying to make us ask that where is the nature and scope, that is the part which has now been discussed in your lecture. While you are trying to see that how education is having its nature and scope in understanding the society, we are also understanding that education is having such characteristics. Okay, so education and social roles are very important to know, because education as a preparatory ground for social roles are always present in the society. So what happens is, inside the state, we always find a kind of image of idealistic state. So here I will try to refer to Weber, who tries to make you understand about the ideal type. That means whenever in society you are trying to understand any particular role, maybe role of a father, role of a mother, role of a sister, role of a sibling, role of a partner, whatever role you are trying to understand, it is always made in terms of ideal form or idealistic way. So education tries to make you understand in a better way that kind of a role, that in which you can understand that how particular role of mother should be, how particular role of father should be, or how particular role of a citizen of a country should be. So the nation state description and all kinds of things are important through understanding of this idealistic state. Then education also helps in imbibing morality, good life, and secured value system. So which I have already told you that education is a gateway to which you can learn morality, good life, and secured value system. Then the next part is there is a reference to Plato, who is trying to divide three kinds of classes in understanding education and social roles. So he is saying there are mainly three categories. What are the three categories? First, the intellectual rulers or philosophers, that means the king. The king, how they were trying to be educated. Like you must be recalling that whenever in the initial period kings were trained, they were sent to the gurukuls. Okay, they were sent to the ashrams in which they were getting training of how to fight a war and how to be Kshatriya. So all these kinds of education and learning were found in the ashramas. The next category is the auxiliaries and the military defenders. What is the meaning of auxiliaries and military defenders? These were the military troops. They were not the elite, but they were the military troops. The last is the workers who produced goods and services. So these are the last category of service group who try to understand education in such a manner that they can serve the other categories of the society. So this is how you understand all the three categories of education and social roles in society. First is the intellectual rulers or philosophers, second is the auxiliaries and the military defenders, and third is the workers who produce goods and services. Then we see the next aspect, that is education as cultivation of reasoning abilities. So what happens is that, as I have already told you, that since the Renaissance period, you understand how education is trying to help you in cultivation of reasoning abilities and cultivation of several kinds of things. We understand that there are mainly two kinds of reasoning abilities. One can be the inductive reasoning, where you see that general inferences are there and from that particular instances are taken. For example, I'll give you all men are mortal. That is the reason why Ram being a man is also mortal, Hari being a man is also mortal. This is an example of inductive reasoning. The next part is the deductive reasoning. What is deductive reasoning? It is a process in which deriving of particular inferences from general instances. So here we can see Ram is mortal, Hari is mortal, therefore all men are mortal. So these kinds of reasoning and rationalities are always developed due to the understanding of the reasoning which is being shaped by education. Then the next is value system. Earlier in one of our discussion, you must be remembering, I was asking you that it should not be in the context specific with value orientation. But whenever we are taking a particular thing within the society, definitely value is going to be attached. For example, education in Indian society, education in American society, education in South African society. So education in and within Indian society is definitely going to be related to the value system. So the more the people are committed and the more the people are attached to the values, we find that people are more accepting the dimensions of education, and it helps them in understanding the cognitive processes as well. So education imbibes all kinds of liberal ideas as well. So whenever you are trying to see any kind of liberal ideas and ideology, that is because of education which is being done. Okay. The next part is also going to deal with the Greek contributions to Western education. So this is also a continuation of the nature and scope of education, where you see that a profound conviction of the possibilities of achieving human excellence is found. That means whenever you are trying to see a kind of Western education, you see achieving of human excellence. As we all of us know that without education, it is difficult for us to have some kind of excellence. The same thing is repeated here, that whenever there is Western education or Eastern education, we can then only think about achieving human excellence. Without that, it is difficult to have the excellence. Then we have education had civic purpose related to the political well-being of the community. So whenever there is a political well-being, definitely the political leaders would be in a position where they must have access to higher level of education. You can also see some cases where the education level might not be that high, but they have to, dispatch a lot number of diversified duties. And that happens because even if they are not educated in terms of degrees, but they are educated in terms of their knowledge. Like, for example, you take example of many of the leaders. Those might not have such high degrees with them, but they will be having a lot number of thick base knowledge, depending on which you can find their service to the society. Then a distinction between the liberal education and the vocational training, which has led to curricular controversies through the Western educational history, is also a part to understand the nature and scope of education. So what is this particular third point? That what do you mean by liberal education? Liberal education means the education which is having a wider horizon and a wider nature and scope, where things are not that much rigid, where things are a little bit flexible in nature. That means, supposedly I will say that whenever you are trying to understand the beauty of the nature, it has to be philosophical in way, so that you can write some poems, you can feel the, sanctity in the nature, and accordingly you will feel a kind of natural beauty. So that is a kind of liberal education. That education which you are following because of realizing the philosophies of life. So that is not going to bring a kind of bread and butter to you. But vocational training is something which is always going to bring a particular kind of placement, and you are going to bring a kind of bread and butter to that. So what happens in the process? That there is a continuous tussle between the liberal education group and the vocational training group. And that controversy has been continuing always as a part of nature and scope understanding of education. And it is so because, like at the beginning, we were discussing with one of our fellow mates saying that education is essential to have some livelihood. So maximum number of people, they say that it is essential because of it tries to generate a livelihood. But some part of the people, those who are into liberal education, they also say that it is essential to realize the philosophies of life. It is not always going to end up in generating livelihood, and it is not always going to make you enter into the category of breadwinning. So this is how we see a kind of continuation of controversies within the ambit of nature and scope of education. Then we come to the next part, that is education and cultural system. So Kumar Swamy 1983 explains that meaningful educational system pursues the following ideas. Suppose in a process of understanding how education and cultural system is interrelated and interlinked to each other, you can see certain essential elements. First is like the universal philosophical attitude. Then second is recognition of sacredness of all things. Okay. So what do you mean by universal philosophical attitude? So suppose like one philosophy you are following, the philosophy of Gandhianism, and someone is coming to you and saying the philosophy of maybe Rabindranath Tagore. So you will say, or the philosophy of B.R. Ambedkar. So you are going to say that since I am a follower of Gandhi, I don't want to adhere to the philosophy of B.R. Ambedkar. So there it is not going to be a culturally accepted education role. Whenever you are an educated a person who is integrated to its own cultural system in an enriched manner, you must find that the universal philosophical attitude must be all encompassing to the Gandhian philosophy also, the Ambedkar philosophy also, and all kinds of philosophical orientations of Rabindranath Tagore, Vivekananda, etc., etc., in a very balanced manner. So you should not be in a position to reject or close your doors of acceptance to any other kind of such ideologies. Then you can see recognition of sacredness of all things. So an educated person who is inclined to the cultural system finds a kind of sacredness or a kind of purity, a kind of sanctity, a kind of positiveness in all the adverse situations. So that is always to be practiced. Then you have religious toleration. So there has to be a lot of secularization, and there should not be any kind of communism, and there should not be any kind of communal violence, and there should be a lot of toleration. Then etiquette, where the civilization is considered to be the result of civil people. So whenever education and cultural system goes in hand, we find that the etiquette, that means the civilization which is resulted, is the result of the civil society. So civil society organizations and civil people are very active in the entire process. Then we find student-teacher relationships to be very strong. So whenever education and cultural system are going hand in hand, we also find that the student-teacher relationships are strong. The last but not the least is socialization as a means of educational process. So whenever the cultural system is closely associated to education, we find that it opens the doors of socialization for the members of the society. For example, in education, you understand that several values of Indian society are present, and how we are going to understand those values and practice those values. So, this is a way in which we are getting socialized. So, we understand that such educational processes are being practiced due to the deep ingraining with the cultural system. Then we come to the next part, that is sociology and education. So as we have already tried to discuss that what we mean by sociology and education can be understood through several identification of current social facts through education. It also refers to identification of relationship between education and social and cultural changes. For example, I will tell you, you remember the time period of the Indian independence movement. So whatever mobilization happened and the way in which India was independent, do you think that people have tried to make such a massive mobilization without understanding and getting education of the social cultural changes? The answer is no. If they are not able to be, educated towards the changing social and cultural changes, then definitely they are not in a position to dispatch their duties in a proper way. So all such changes, maybe the changes of the reformative movement, maybe the changes of the Indian independence movement, everywhere we see that there is considerable relationship between the education and social cultural changes and its understanding by the people. Then next, cross-cultural and comparative research in various aspects of educational system. So we see that how there is a cross-cultural and comparative research in various aspects that contributes towards the educational system. When you understand about the cross-cultural and comparative research, we mean that things may not be referred, things may not be texted, but while you are getting educated and while you are getting trained with several comparisons and several references, you can try to understand such kind of educational system. Then investigation of schools and classrooms as an ongoing social system. That is specifically explained by one of the most famous education sociologists, Jairam Sir, in the year 1990. The scope of such an aspect provides the basics for determining the objectives of education, place of education in society, and interplay between schools and community. Then the next part we go to the theories of education. So when we are discussing about the theories of education, the first aspect of theories of education which is coming is regarding the functionalist viewpoint of education. So, if you people must be aware about few aspects of theories, then whenever we are saying about the functional perspective, it means that everything as an absolute social phenomena is functional to the society, and that it is always functional in the past, present, and future, and it is going to determine the functions of the society. So there is no scope for any kind of dysfunctions. There can be only functional aspect of education. So in such a context, there were mainly four functions of education which were understood. The first was transmission of cultural values. So in this context, you must have heard about a very famous thinker named as Talcott Parsons. So Parsons says that whenever there is transmission of cultural values, it happens only and only through schools, because schools are fields where children come, mingle with each other, and they don't have any kind of subjective connotation in the entire process of interaction and transmission. So they do the transmission of cultural values in an unconscious manner, which has not been consciously undertaken and which has been not noted by either the subject or the object. So transmission of cultural values with a reference to Parsons School. Then next is social control, where Emile Durkheim, who is another very famous thinker in the field of sociology of education, he says that in school when subjects like history, English, religious education, etc. are being taught, it is indirectly bringing a kind of social control on the subjects of the school. So, in a way, when you are reading about the history, that what X has done to Y, if it is legal and if it is accepted by the wider society, then definitely it has been acknowledged and awarded. But if X does something illegal to Y, then the throughout the pages of history, you can understand that that is not accepted and that has been rejected, punished in a punitive manner, and been completely blacklisted in the pages of history. So we learn from the history that social control can be taken upon any subject or object depending on what kind of understanding or grasping they find in the schools. Then we come to the next part, that is economic training. When we say about economic training, we have to understand that our continuous societal progress is dependent on the economic progress of any country. Whenever we are trying to understand the net output towards the development of economy, we have to understand that there needs to be people who are trained to serve in that kind of an economy. For example, in Indian society, we have the LPG model, that is liberalization, privatization, and globalization. People, those who are serving in Indian society, are also trained to serve in that kind of a developing society and developing economy. Similarly, America being one of the most developed nations, people those who are serving to the American economy are trained the way to serve to the developed nation. And people those who are serving to South Africa, for instance, it being a kind of underdeveloped country, people within such economy are trained to serve to the underdeveloped countries. So these are the distinctions in which we find that people happen to get economic training in a distinctive manner to serve to different kinds of economy. Then the last thing which we are discussing in this context is social selection. Davis and Murray always try to explain us regarding the occupational social selection and distribution of positions in the industrial society, which leads us to understand the last factor of functional perspective of education. So what Davis and Moore say is that whenever you are trying to see a person who is at the manager rank, who is at the top rank of the hierarchy, then definitely the social selection must have been made as per his suitable degrees and as per his suitable exposure to the experiences in that particular field. Similarly, people those who are serving in the medium category or in the medium ladder of the hierarchy must have been exposed and having such kind of medium level of education. And last, those who are serving at the grassroots and the ground root, they must be also having such kind of exposure as compared to the middle and the higher categories. So the social selection is always based on the kind of deserving educational levels and deserving experiences in particular fields. So the entire understanding of these four functions of education brings us to the conclusion that the functionalist viewpoint of education is always emphasizing and re-emphasizing on the functional aspect of education, and it denies to see the negative aspect of education or any kind of loopholes in the entire process of education. Then we come to the next part, that is conflict perspective. What do we mean by the conflict perspective? When we are discussing about conflict, all of you must be having some idea on the conflict perspective that is being given by Karl Marx. Conflict means a continuous conflict and tussle between the haves and the have-nots, between the rich and the poor, between the bourgeois and the proletariat, and between the so-called rich and the poor. So a continuous tussle and a dialectical relation between all these groups throughout the pages of history is what is resulting in the conflict perspective. Now the major question comes that we have understood this in terms of capitalist society. But here when we are discussing about the conflict perspective on education, how can we relate such kind of an understanding to the education which has been built up in schools, colleges and educational institutions? The answer to this is the conflict perspective says that society is in a state of perpetual disequilibrium, and yet it is being maintained as a body by powerful social groups that coerce cooperation from the less powerful. They treat society as divided into dominant and subordinate groups, and they are characterized by continuous struggle and conflict in between them. So what do you understand by this? As we were referring, that there is a continuous disequilibrium in the society, and in such kind of a disequilibrium, the powerful social groups always try to coerce and dominate on the less powerful group. So, from these categories of rich and poor, haves and have-nots, powerful and less powerful, definitely children are going to go to schools and they are going to have their seats in particular classes. So when such kind of disequilibrium and this imbalancement and kind of, distinction is being expressed within the classroom, that is making us to understand about what conflict approach in education tries to make us understand. So in this context, there is a very famous conflict thinker whose name is Louis Althusser. Althusser sees the role of education as an ideological grounding. Capitalist values are promoted via the hidden curriculum of informal learning. So as I have told you that the distinction between the haves and the have-nots also persists inside the classroom. Here, Althusser is trying to make us understand that whenever you are trying to understand the curriculum of a particular thing, of a classroom or a course or a subject, you see that the capitalist value systems are hidden within the curriculum. The curriculum is not made in terms of learning of the working class or the less powerful and the poor categories, but the curriculum is always made in terms of the rich, affluent and the bourgeois categories, so that their children are more benefited. Althusser argues working class children never come into contact with ways of thinking that they would be challenging the status quo. That means all those who are into the working class and all those who are into the serving class, they are not being trained in such a manner that they can challenge the status quo of the rich people, that they can challenge the status quo of the more powerful categories. Rather, whatever curriculum is provided, that creates a kind of rules, routines, and selection of work curriculum for production of capitalism. So instead of making the poor class category enriched to fight against the capitalists, the curriculum is trying to bring a routinized pattern through which they just try to, reflect their own position in a very sorry manner, and they again join their hands to the production of the capitalist ideology. So they don't happen to reject that, but they happen to again, in a way, produce and reproduce the same thinking. Then the next part goes to the reference of Bowles and Ginty. These are also two famous conflict thinkers who have tried to study schooling in capitalist society. And both of them claim that schools reward conformity over intelligence and achievement. That means in school, and nowadays the schools, they keep on celebrating Environment Day, keep on celebrating Red Day, Black Day, and so many things. If any of our co-associates are parenting their children, they know how tough it is to bring up a child in today's society, because schools are always representation of capitalist modalities. You can never imagine a child from a working class to be able to stand up to the expectations of getting such high class celebrations of Environment Day, Flower Day, Parents Day, Grandparents Day, what not? So, all those materialistic consumptions and demands by the schools, which are made again and again, clearly shows that it is a capitalist society and a capitalist model of working. So, according to their study at American school, the hard-working students were getting better grades as compared to the intelligent and creative students. So here they are trying to say that a kind of research shows that whenever there is a kind of component of hard work among the students, they happen to get better grades. And their study is relating hard work also to the affluent class. So, in the poor class, if there are few people who are intelligent and creative, but they are not belonging to the affluent class, they are not getting an opportunity to go ahead. Then, in the similar terms, they are discussing about the vocational schemes and training were considered as a plot in which the have-nots were engaged just to make themselves self-sustained, but were not in a position to beat the capitalists. So this brings us to the reference to earlier point, what I've already shared with you, that the vocational schemes and training were always a minimum justified way through which the working class could get 2 quarters a meal and sustain themselves. But that was not sufficient to question the status quo of the capitalist or to beat the capitalist people. Okay? So then we go next to the interactionist perspective of education. So by this time, we have successfully completed the capitalist, the functionalist model, and then we have discussed about the conflict model. And now we are coming to the interactionist perspective. So before we go to the interactionist perspective, I try to make you understand that what we mean by interactionist perspective. So if I tell you that what do you mean by interaction, you would definitely say that when there is a stimulus, there is a response. So this kind of stimulus response understanding of face-to-face interaction, when taken into the classroom setting and applied into the education and learning pattern, it is known as the interactionist perspective of education. They suggest that status of the students in an educational system is decided by the nature of interactions with teachers, where meanings are constructed beyond academic parameters. So, what we understand from here is, if there is a face-to-face interaction, and in that face-to-face interaction, an affluent class representation and facial expressions would be always much more of a comfort zone. But a working class kid who would have been always struggling with the basic necessities of life cannot give such kind of facial interactions or comfort zone. They will be always struggling and always trying to come up to the expectations. Some of the significant contributors of this are Kool-Aid, Mead, Bloomer, Scrooge, Garfinkel, Berger, and Luckman. Kool-Aid's concept of the looking glass self theory also explains how students develop an idea about their own self while interacting with others. So what happens here, that whenever you are discussing about the looking glass self theory which C.H. Cooley has given, supposedly I'll try to focus on this particular thing. Affluent class category kid is interacting with a poor background category child, then the poor category kind of child tries to understand what is being told by the affluent category through the behaviors, through the facial expression, and through the patterns in which they both are interacting with each other. So what happens is self-defensive mechanism of a small kid belonging to the poor background tries to evaluate that what kind of an image the rich kid is having on him or rich kid is having on her. So that is determining a lot of self-evaluation. Supposedly in school, some of your fellow mates have tried to insult you, have tried to bring some smashing comments on you. That is definitely going to bring a kind of hurt to the self-esteem and ego of a person. So all these kinds of things work, and that kind of an self-evaluation through the other's perspective is known as the looking glass self-theory. Then we come to the Harvard Mead's insights on this particular interactionist perspective. According to Mead, individuals construct the self through the process of role taking. Role taking involves the individuals imaginatively taking the role of the other persons with whom he is interacting. Supposedly, whenever all of you were children, you must have seen many of you saying that I aspire to become a teacher like my madam or sir in the school when I grow up. So that is a kind of role taking. Since you are groomed by the teachers, you take that role into yourself and you think that when you are going to grow up, you are also going to become a teacher like them. So that is how the role taking takes place. So Mead is trying to make us understand that the interactions inside the classroom are mostly happening because of the role taking. And people happen to relate themselves with any kind of role they have chosen. Then we come to the next part, that is Goffman. Goffman equates the world with drama in which actors present their self in everyday life through impression management phase. So here he says that, even if there is a poor kid, that poor kid is also trying to have his own impression on the teacher that he is also a good student. And he is trying to work accordingly in his day-to-day everyday life. And similarly, if you are trying to see a rich kid, that rich kid is also trying to put a kind of impression on the teacher that he is also trying to do such kind of good things. So all of them are wrapped in a daily episode of drama, and accordingly it is continued. To get more idea about how the interactionists are functioning in the education, we refer to Howard Becker, 1971, who studied few classrooms and explained that teachers delineated some meanings to students. For instance, teachers constructed the image of an ideal student from non-working class or affluent class, and accordingly behaved and the image of a problematic student from working class. So what happened is, teachers also tried to make a kind of impression. All those who are belonging to the rich class were known to be the idealistic student, which I have already told you in my earlier part of lecture. And some people, those who are not to the ideal part of student, are belonging to the are belonging to the working class or the daily laborers children. So this is how teachers are also trying to make a kind of imagination and fitting the students into that. Similarly, in another study by Cisorel, 1971, it is understood that the students are evaluated by their background rather than their class performances. So this is how we are trying to understand that things are taken in such way. So with this, I would try to wind up today's discussion and I would get back to all of you. You can unmute your speakers and we can discuss about whatever issues we want to discuss. And I open the floor to all of you. Yes. Yes, you can ask me question and we can have a small
Ma'am,
discussion.
Praveen here, ma'am.
Yes, Praveen?
Ma'am, can you please once again tell me, I mean, what is the difference between inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning? Uh, I just misunderstood. If you,
No, this is a very simple thing. Whenever you are trying to make any kind of understanding of reasoning, supposedly there is inductive reasoning. Okay, so inductive reasoning means you are having a kind of wider generalistic perspective. From that, you are inducing. Okay. So, like,
okay,
so for example, I will say that all students of IGNOU are excellent. Therefore, Ram is excellent, Praveen is excellent, Sagram is excellent, Anupama is excellent. So, in this way, we are going. That is inductive. Okay. So, first the general thing we have told, and from there we are coming to the step by step. Because we are saying the deductive thing, then we will go the reverse way. Praveen is an excellent student, Sangram is an excellent student, Amapuna is an excellent student, Ikeshri is an excellent student. Therefore, all students of the group into the course of this are excellent. You get my point? So
okay,
it's like as per the terminology, inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, or mainly if someone of you are indulged with logic or philosophy, there we say it as inductive logic and deductive logic. Okay, so it's very simple to understand. That won't be an issue for you. Okay,
okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
welcome. Anyone else? Yes.
Ma'am Sangram here.
Ha, Sangram, tell me.
Ma'am, I want to know about conflict theory again.
Sangram, whenever we are saying about conflict theory, we are always trying to focus on what kind of conflict or what kind of tussle is going on between two categories of haves and have-nots, rich and poor, affluent and less affluent, more powerful and less powerful. So when these all categories we were seeing in the capitalist mode of society, it was a different story. But when we want to understand conflict perspective from within the classroom, we saw that inside the classroom also there were a kind of conflict and there were a kind of continuous tussle between the kids of the affluent family and the kids of the poor family. So there was continuous struggle between these two categories. A kind of self-defense mechanism works into that. A kind of interactionist behavior works into that. So in simple terms, if you want to understand conflict perspective in terms of education, you have to understand that whenever there is reflection of the bourgeois and proletariat category in terms of education accessibility and in terms of education adhering inside the classroom, that can be also known as a conflict perspective of education. And I have already discussed about the major thinkers like Marxian perspective, Althusser perspective, Gilliard's perspective, all these perspectives we have discussed. And you can refer to your textbook also. It has been very beautifully and extensively explained in your textbooks.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes. So anyone else who want to come in or discuss?
Go ahead if anybody want to ask any question. I am audible.
Yes, you are audible.
I am audible. So I'm telling to all the learners. I mean, whatever the invitation I send it to you, your class will continue May 22nd. Okay, you have a 4 paper, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the MSO E1 will continue up to 29. Then E2 it will start from 30th to 6th. Then your third paper will start on June 7th to 14th, and your fourth paper is on 15th to 22. And what are the optional paper you would update, like your 3 and 6? So that you are not made any schedule. When the political science course will start, then you will invite you in that group. So you can join class on there. So I can tell you students, you are very fortunate. Due to this pandemic, due to the online, you are getting a very good faculty members. Like, Bani Bihar, like, I mean, because what is the problem? Suppose somebody from, Fulwani or somebody is from Raurkela. So these teacher cannot move to that place. So now a good opportunity. The excellent teachers, I can tell you, the excellent academic counselors. So they are teaching you. So don't miss this chance. And what I which way she is presenting, I feel it's a tremendous. I don't know how you are feeling. So you tell your friends also, because very few numbers are joining. Don't lose this chance. And also, the recording is available. I will put it in your WhatsApp group. So dear learners, I just request you to please kindly inform your friends, because you know a lot of people are away, whatever the reason. You tell them they will join, and
Yes,
other than
Santosh sir, I'll also add on to all our learners here that recently I had taken a class
everything.
for Open University. So there were more than
Yeah, yeah,
120, 150 students in that session, and there was heavy discussion, and we crossed the time limit. So as sir is saying, Santosh sir is
yeah,
saying, more number of students should join.
yeah.
Yes, over to you, Santosh sir.
And dear learners, see, might be you are not receive a study material, but I given you soft copy at that WhatsApp group, and I am sending you mail also. Before please go through with your materials. One way it will go some, because you will not out. Because map has presented one and a half hour, 140 minutes. After that, if you no doubt, that means you are not studying rightly. Don't take it otherwise. Before coming to class, at least see your books. If not, hard copy is present with you, but I had provided the soft copy. So it's kind request to all of you, before coming to next class, because tomorrow is the next class, ma'am will discover the different thinkers, okay, educational thinkers. So please go through with your materials. Any ask any go ahead, students.
Okay, Santosh sir, there is Itishri who is asking one question. What are the functional aspects of education? So I will tell you that whatever functional aspects we have discussed is related to the areas of nature and scope also, which we have discussed today. When we are discussing about the functional aspects of education, it is including how education is related to the value system, how education is trying to bring employability, how education is imbibing a kind of strong cultural system, how education is trying to spread the liberal value systems. So many of, I think, 5 or 6 points we have discussed. So that is also available in your textbook. That also you can refer, and the functional aspects of education can be understood in these ways. After that, you can also refer to the functional theoretical dimension, where we have discussed about mainly these 3, 4 areas, where we are seeing about the social control, how education is helping in social control. Then we are discussing about economic training, how due to education the people those who are serving the economy in different parts of the world, they are trained. Then you are also having within the schools how person is saying that there has to be a liberal thought process. Then you are seeing how Durkheim is saying that with understanding of English and history and other kinds of curriculum education, we are developing the holistic personality. So all these are parts of functional aspects of education. Okay, Itishri, I think I have made your doubt clear. You can refer to both these aspects, the generalistic understanding of nature and scope and the functional perspective of education for your doubt clearance. Okay? Yes. Yes, Santosh sir. You can continue. Or if anyone has any doubt, you can ask me. You can write it in the chat box also. Yes, I would also want you people to let one thing know that my lectures will not be following completely tit by tit of the details of the textbook. Whatever I am trying to make you understand will be making a wider understanding of the issues which are dealt in your textbook, because I consider that we are academic counselors. So if we follow whatever is written in the textbook, then we are not offering you anything extra. So for that sense, I would ask you people, as Dr. Santosh sir was also saying, that you must read the text and have a basic idea. After that, then whatever extra things I am saying or we are discussing, you can relate to it, and that would be easier for you to go. But please, as for this is the first session of mine, and some of you were keen in knowing that why the exact words which are given in the textbook are not found in your lecture, don't expect that, because we being trained from JNU and other parts of the world, we will be not in a position to go to the nitty-gritties of the textbook. Textbook you have already there. What we are meant as academic counselors is we will help you in widening your thinking pattern to understand the background knowledge and extra thinking. So that we will try to do. Okay. If anyone has got any further questions, you can ask, or I can ask Dr. Santosh to wind up today's session so that tomorrow we can resume from whatever we have discussed today. And I would ask all of you to also little bit check out whatever you have written, so that if any doubt is there, you can ask me tomorrow also. Okay, so then I take all of your leave. I hope that all of you had enjoyed the session. I see 7 people over here. Thank you for your patient hearing. Thank you, Dr. Panigrahi, Santosh Panigrahi, sir, for helping all the learners and me as academic counselor to be able to facilitate this session. I sincerely appreciate all your effort to coordinate the students and the counselors to bring to this forum. So my sincere thanks to all of you. So I take your leave now, okay? All the best. We see tomorrow in the next class.
Thank you.
challenge model na